these days, what do I do for niche research? One of the methods actually was shared by Gerald, where he shared how to use black box inside Helium. Here, in a way, comes to the most interesting questions around AI.
This is such an important point that Paul is talking about here.
So research tools that are super interesting right now, obviously NotebookLM. And within 3 minutes, you're going to have an idea for a book based on science, based on what people have actually said about books inside that niche.
And I think that is becoming more and more important now with people's attention span.
If you're really serious about things, you should never compromise on data. You should always be going for the quickest way to access and understand, to comprehend the data. I mean, clearly there is an incredible opportunity commercially and in terms of a business to build.
I have had 9 years and I haven't found anything that I would trade for this business model.
I've come to realize the potential to leverage the best of tech, the best of your mind, the best of your experience.
Once you get a book to take off, it will stick and it will be like real estate on Amazon.
I think actually I've settled on the thing that probably I should have done much earlier, which is book publishing.
Hi everyone, I'm happy to welcome Paul to this interview today. Paul is an award-winning documentary filmmaker whose work has been featured on major networks like BBC, PBS, and NHK, and shown at top film festivals worldwide. His films, including The Warning, The Russian Revolution, and The Slaves of the Sword, have been watched by millions. After a successful 20-year career in filmmaking, Paul turned his talents to education and publishing. In this interview, we'll dive into Paul's strategies for finding great ideas, developing strong concepts, and using powerful tools to streamline the publishing process. His online courses on storytelling, creativity, and productivity have reached over 68,000 students in 168 countries. In 2019, he founded Brillianto to help people with writing, filmmaking, and storytelling. And one thing I've always admired about Paul is his incredible depth of knowledge about the software and tools we discuss inside the Driven Publishers Elite group calls. He's always ahead of the curve when it comes to finding and mastering the best resources to improve the publishing process. The first question I have for you, Paul, is how did your experience in filmmaking prepare you for publishing books?
Great question. You know, I think there's one sense in which I think and speaking now as a newbie book publisher, so therefore everything I say has to have that caveat. But I think that clearly when, it's a huge ecosystem, it's an ocean, right? So it's similar to an international audience for documentary film, for example, that when one is getting into publishing, of course, there's all the commercial stuff and all the niche stuff and all the rest of it, which we'll go into in this chat, I know. But really, what it's about is the opportunity to influence and touch people's hearts and minds through the stuff that you publish. And whenever I was making documentary films, frankly, if you're going to get into the kind of craziness that most making feature-length documentaries actually involves in terms of the depth of research, the difficulty of getting access, sometimes quite dangerous situations and locations, and so on and so forth. I was making investigative documentary films for many years in the Middle East and Russia and the Balkans and places like that. So not so easy in terms of locations or topics, to be honest. But when one's going through a really difficult process, and there's no question that clearly book publishing is a difficult process. It's not, there's a number of things to crack inside the book publishing process, which you've mastered and which you're very kindly sharing now through DPE. But there's absolutely an analogy, I think, between, if you like, top-level documentary filmmaking and top-level book publishing, because it involves a series of challenges, a series of intellectual, even psychological, commercial, certainly, challenges, and frankly, just some kind of grit. I think it's important to just keep going sometimes when you have a vision of something and something's important, something's interesting, something is worth putting out there. And, as with the filmmaking world, you need validation, of course. You need to know that the film is going to appeal to a wide audience. With book publishing. So there's a number of analogies on what I think is the most important level, which is ultimately it's to do with the evolution and growth of people and the evolution and growth of yourself inside a business like that. So, for me, that's why it's interesting. That's why I've got into it now, having gone through documentary film, as you said, audiobook narration actually for a while, having put out online courses, having had a website that got 1/3 clicks a month at one point. So I've had it, I've bounced around a bit, but I think actually I've settled on the thing that probably I should have done much earlier, which is book publishing. I think there's something really there.
Yeah. You covered it a little bit, but was there any specific point or anything that really, this inspired me to move from filmmaking to book publishing?
I think ultimately it comes down to a vision of what you want to do in life. I hope that doesn't sound too kind of grandiose or pompous, but ultimately it's beyond the money. It's actually about what kind of legacy do you want to leave with the work that you've done. At the end of the day, you are the sum of your work, right? You're the fruit of your labors. And that's both in the middle of your life and perhaps also towards the end of your life. And so I'd like to look back, on a raft of interesting ideas and useful ideas that will have been put out not only through my films, but also through books that I will publish. And I think when I came to, if you like, the realization that actually books are much more permanent than films. They probably have a more permanent life, actually. Many of my films are locked away in cupboards in various television channels around the world because I was in the pre-digital age for quite a lot of the films I was making. So, huge amounts of work and time and effort and, blah, 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 are basically now in cupboards, And at least with books, at least in this digital age, you have the chance that a book or series of books can actually be a lasting legacy.
I'm very happy you brought up that, because that's one of my motivations as why I'm so passionate about publishing as well, is the impact that we're able to have and the legacy that we're able to leave with our books. So I'm very grateful you brought that up. Moving on to,
I think on a much more kind of less prosaic level, I mean, clearly there is an incredible opportunity commercially and in terms of a business to build, or businesses actually to build with book publishing. And I think that's the other reason that I've been drawn to it. I've come to realize the potential to leverage the best of tech, the best of your mind, the best of your experience across a fairly diversified portfolio that can really work as a business.
Yeah, it's an amazing business model, and I have had the 9 years, and I haven't found anything that I would trade for this business model. Because once you get a book to take off, and especially if it gets a lot of reviews and it gets a lot of sales, it will stick, and it will be like real estate on Amazon. So it's amazing in that way. Moving on to question number 3, what tools help you confirm a book niche, and how do you use them?
I'm going to be a little bit blunt here, actually, and it goes straight to the jugular, really, which is that certainly with web publishing, people in the web publishing world, the SEO world, people who are basically building big websites, really there's only 2 tools that they use. There's either Ahrefs or there's SEMrush. And most of the SEO agencies will definitely have Ahrefs in their arsenal. The reason is simple. Ahrefs over 15 or 20 years has built up a proprietary data set that is the most comprehensive data set and the most accurate data set. Okay, great. That's for SEO. That's for if you're publishing websites. So when I basically have invested in every single niche research tool on book publishing, iTunes, BookBeam, KD Spy, I've got them all. Yeah, but basically when I understood that Helium 10 basically has the data. They've got the data from the FBA world, but they clearly also, certainly when it comes to things like Cerebro, they have the keyword data for Amazon, right? And so basically I've ended up with a diamond plan on Helium, which is bloody $250 a month. So it's certainly not cheap. But the point is, you can't, in my view at least, if you're really serious about things, you should never compromise on data. You should always be going for the best data and the quickest way to access and understand, to comprehend the data, right? Now, their audience is not book publishers. Helium 10's audience, as you know, is basically fulfilled by Amazon. It's the FBA crowd, it's drop shipping, and it's the guys who are, who are basically trading products, which I'm also getting into, by the way. That's another story. But the point is that their data set is clearly really, really good. And so these days, what do I do for niche research? One of the methods actually was shared by Gerald on, recently, about a month or two back, where he shared how to use black box inside Helium, right? And so literally you go for, okay, number of, volume of sales, $1,000 a month, right? Number of reviews less than 20, age of book less than 6 months, click, bang, list of books, lists of winners. I mean, that's an incredible way to find winning books. Books that are, now I know that BookBeam also is good at that, and you can also use the niche research tool in BookBeam, but for me at least, Helium, the way Helium does it is very, very good. Then in terms of confirmation, more often than not, I will identify a winning book. I'll look for a book that clearly is winning. I'll look for, okay, why? What is it about this book? But obviously going into the keywords that book is ranking for, and understanding to what degree the keywords that book is ranking for through sponsored ads, or whether it's organically ranking for those keywords, starts to give me a sense also of what the opportunity is inside a particular sub niche. So honestly, that's what I'm mainly using now.
So to summarize, it's primarily Helium 10 that you're using to help you find keywords to make your book succeed.
I use Helium 10 as the primary instrument. Then I use the other tools, including Publisher Rocket, as confirmatory tools. I have a quick look at them. I just run the same main keyword through all of those tools, just as a kind of check and balance, really, on Helium, as a kind of idiot check. If they all raised red flags and Helium's the only one showing the green flag, then I dig deeper.
Okay, that's great information. Why is it important to study reviews of the similar books, and how do tools assist in this process?
Well, first of all, I think the reviews are an amazing way to spot the gap, to spot a gap in a niche, and to understand, is something clearly missing. If you see a pattern of behavior in anything, it's usually interesting, and also true with reviews. A very simple tip, if you like, to people watching this would be, you can use KD Spy, for example, to download all of the reviews. And then what you do is stick those reviews into GPT and say, hey, GPT, analyze these reviews and tell me what's missing. Tell me what people love, what do people hate, where's the opportunity? I mean, within 3 minutes, you're going to have an idea for a book based on science, based on research, based on what people have actually said about books inside that niche, right? Helium 10 does a review analysis as well, to do with matching patterns of keyword clusters and of phrases and so forth, and you can start to dig in with stuff like that. But actually, you can do it with a cheap one-time fee tool, which is KD Spy and GPT.
Yeah, that's amazing. Very practical. Which tools do you use to streamline research before writing, and how do you use them?
This immediately opens up the biggest challenge, actually, with complex projects, and true for documentary film, absolutely true for books, I believe, is that the research process only really finishes when you actually publish the book. And in fact, it doesn't really finish then either, because the chances are you carry on researching the damn thing, or at least you have an eye open, and then you're open to having a second edition or what have you of the book, to update the book with better research. The research process never really stops, right? And the hardest thing in complex ideation and complex publishing, I think, whether it's in films or perhaps in books as well, is to stay true to the controlling idea of what you're actually publishing. What's the central idea? What's the concept? And over a period of time, it's so easy to drift away from that. You get sucked down all sorts of little rabbit holes, including research rabbit holes. They're very tempting, they're very beautiful, they're very seductive, but actually they don't get you anywhere. And so the real challenge, I think, certainly as a film director and now as a book publisher, is to constantly remind yourself, what's the central idea? What's the real thing I'm trying to get here? And keep hammering and glue yourself with super glue to that, right? So that the whatever research methodologies you're using serve that controlling idea. So that's the first thing to say. And to understand it's a continuous process. It's not something, for me at least, that I do, before writing a book. So I don't do, I would do research first and then write the book, but the actual research is going to carry all the way through. And so the tools that I use are ones that, and they're in very rapid evolution right now, which needs to be said, are ones that allow the flexibility to grow the insights, because the best research gives insights, right? The best research, the value in human affairs is not actually information or knowledge. The value in human affairs is wisdom and insight. Those are the things to lock onto and to grab, like gold, and stick them onto your concept tree. Kind of attach them to the tree as you go along. So research tools that are super interesting right now, obviously NotebookLM, right? Google's NotebookLM, really interesting. $20 a month to get the paid version of that. It allows up to 300 sources. It starts to analyze all the sources, suggest pathways inside it. You can now custom tone the language of the responses, so therefore you can tell it to be concise, just give it bullet points, use a bit of humor that usually fails with humor. But basically what you can do is literally ram in up to 300 sources, 300 full-length books into an engine that will then basically almost instantly give you any angle on that research you care to have. I mean, that's an extraordinary tool right off the bat then. Sometimes I'll use quite, well, actually, let's not talk about the past. Let's talk about the present and the future. Google Deep Research in Gemini is just coming in. And this will literally spend minutes, which from AI is extraordinary, going out across hundreds or thousands of sources to get the most authoritative take on a particular angle or question. I mean, that's mind-blowing, frankly. I mean, that's the equivalent to having a human researcher on a topic for 2 months. So those are two research sources straight out of the bat that I would draw people's attention to.
When you were speaking now, one question I have is, how much do you change the results that you're getting from these AI tools? Is it perfect from the start, or how does that work?
No, not at all. And here in a way comes to the most interesting questions around AI, because you're at the intersection of ethics, good judgment, good editorial judgment, and a good nose. It's like an editorial nose. It's like a journalistic nose. Is there the bullshit if we're out here with the stuff or not? If there is, pay attention to that instinct really fast and really hard, because you're probably right, and you need to just dig in and really check, right? Human intuition, I think, is interesting when it comes to the functioning of these tools. And so, obviously we've gone through stages of this, right? I mean, and GPT-isms and all the rest of it, and AI-isms and AI detectors, which basically are useless. But anyway, that's a kind of another story. But the real point is that the emotional intelligence inside good research and good writing cannot really easily come from AI. So the first layer to really pay attention to, in my view, is this working as a human narrative? Does it have pacing? Does it have? Is it lively? Is it? Are there allegories? Are there little stories inside here? Is there an example? Do we undercut it sometimes to give something unexpected, right? And this is true as true for nonfiction as it is for good fiction, right? We're talking here about the best level of writing and publishing, not obviously. We're not in the kind of the humdrum, 30,000 word kind of, let's just walk the plank for 2 hours. We're talking about something that's really worth putting out there and worth publishing, worth researching, worth paying time to, and everything else. And so the first test is that bullshit test of, does this feel Does it feel good? Does it feel alive? Is this actually for human to read, right? And that's tricky. It's tricky to get AI to do an approximation of that. And some of the tools around these days are basically taking the style and tone and pacing and so forth that you yourself would write in, and actually modeling that, and then going through various processes to actually produce a second draft of the initial AI draft. And that second draft will then effectively be much, much closer to something that you will have written. But to really answer your question is really about good editorial judgment, right? And that's a human thing.
And
I mean, there are tools like AutoCrit. There are tools like AutoCrit, for example, that can model against established authors, including in the nonfiction space, or Marlowe does it in fiction, for example, and they will actually then start to try to score how close have you got to quality writing and so on and so forth. But really, it's the human eye has to go on this stuff.
Yeah, and how do one get that experience that you need to see, okay, maybe there needs to be a story here, maybe there needs to be an example here, maybe this text is too long, maybe it needs to be more concise. How can one go about getting that knowledge of what makes good writing?
It's a bit like friends, isn't it? You're likely to be the sum of the 5 friends who you surround yourself by most closely, right? That's the adage, right? It's the same with writing and reading. Who are you reading? That's the question. What are you reading? And why squander your time on stuff that you want to basically isolate the best stuff, the best writing in a particular niche, in a particular area, and hoover that up, train yourself through basically, through osmosis, through basically reading the stuff, right? And that is going to involve a few hours at the Kindle. But there you go. And that's the way to develop the sense of where quality is. There's a wonderful book called Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance by Robert Pirsig. He wrote it in the 1970s, I think it was, 76, I'm going to guess, right? It tells the story of a father and son taking a motorcycle journey across America, but it's really a philosophical journey. And there's a wonderful moment in it where, he explains that quality cannot be measured. Quality cannot be, there's no empirical measurement of quality. It's a sense of what is quality, right? So you can have every academic literary historian in the world try to analyze a literary text or a piece of writing, but ultimately the perception of quality comes down to the reader. And so it's tuning yourself into quality. That's what counts.
That's a great point as well. It comes down to the reader. So that can also mean that a different reader will appreciate one thing, for example, a kid, and then an adult, let's say very educated person, might appreciate something else. So that's a great point. One of my favorite books is On Writing Well by William Sisner, where he says that writing is clear thinking on paper, and that you don't want to overcomplicate the writing in the sense that you lose the readers. And I think that is becoming more and more important now with people's attention span, that you want to make sure that they're able to understand what you want to convey rather quickly. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. I had to make 90 minutes documentary films, right? And if you're going to ask an audience to sit down and watch 90 minutes of television or of a film, you better bloody well make sure that your narrative and the way you're constructing the book, the structure of the film, works, right? And in filmmaking, there's lots of tricks we use to get that, to happen, including maybe something interesting here. The hardest thing to find in a film is structure. To get a film to work emotionally, psychologically, in terms of narrative. And the problem with film is it's like 3-dimensional chess. Whenever you move a sequence or a shot or a scene or whatever inside a film, you change everything in the way in which that film feels. all the way through the film, right? And so there was a trick in film editing where, you go through what you think will work in logic, right, for something to work, and then it still doesn't bloody work. It still feels flat. It feels crap. And then there's the trick, which is you can then you can literally watch a 90-minute, or typically in filmmaking, you have a rough cut. So it might be, say, a 2-hour or 2.5-hour rough cut before you start to pare it down and make the film. You watch it at high speed. And the idea is to do, it's like burst transmission in the special forces. You want to basically see something really fast through to have an impressionistic idea of what you've got, to map it in your mind in a different way from going through it at normal speed, right? And Spielberg, when asked what the secret of filmmaking was, he said, well, structure. Okay, so what's the second secret? Structure. Third, structure. And so the really good directors, and I would argue maybe the best publishers, understand that structure, I think, is the secret, right? And if you get the structure of a book or of a film or anything actually right, that's what's to play for. But then you have to think, well, okay, so part of the structure is, how do we get the person sufficiently invested in this book or its film or whatever it is, to then actually trust you, to trust the voice and to trust the authority, to trust the quality of the book, to then read through the rest of the book. So, if your first five pages are not gold, then why the hell would you expect someone to read the rest of the book, right?
That so many great points there. So what you said there last, in terms of, I think it's, I don't quote me on this, but it's like 90% of people, they don't read past the introduction or chapter 1. So like you said, it's really about hooking them to want to continue reading the next chapters. And what you mentioned there about structure, it got me thinking about how preparation, the more we prepare beforehand, the better the more returns we will get in the end. So it's not just the structure, but also the idea of the book, because that lays the foundation of the structure. So I really appreciate you bringing that up, because I always hire an outline creator that does the structure, and then based on that structure, the writing is then added in, and that is what will lead to a great product in the end. But if the structure is suboptimal, it doesn't matter if it's the greatest writer in the world, because if people don't want to read about it, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah. I'll always remember meeting a guy who used to be in the British Special Forces. I met this guy in Moscow in the early 90s, and he was doing various things out in Russia. But Russia was so impossibly difficult then. Everything was just, even getting somewhere, or you'd have to go through vodka sessions, or you'd have to, negotiate with impossible people from crawled out from under rocks. I mean, blah, 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 blah. And Tim had an expression. He said, rule of one. He said, if I get one thing done today, just one thing done, he said, I've won the day. Today's been a successful day, right? Well, Benjamin Britten, I think it was, said that, the people who listen to a concert, right? They only ever remember the opening bars and the closing bars of the piece. They don't remember the rest. So I challenge you. I mean, if you give someone a non-fiction book, right, and you get them to read it, and then you say, right, close the book. Now tell me what you got out of that book. And so this is the core, this is the controlling idea thing, and why you just kind of want to come at it from kind of all these angles, I think, in terms of structure, but actually to deliver an experience, a transformative experience, that of course it delivers the knowledge, of course it delivers the facts, of course it delivers it delivers the bread and butter. It delivers the promise, right? This will teach you how to use GPT. Great. Teach them how to use GPT. But what you're really looking for is something that is that touches them, inspires them, or gives them a vision of something that can be more interesting. And I think certainly if I have beta readers in the future, what are my questions on the list? And I'll certainly ask them about, did they understand stuff? Was there anything unclear? All the usual questions, right? But I would also be very interested by responses on things like, how did I feel? How did you feel? after reading this book? I think is a super important question, right? Because ultimately,
I think this is such an important point that Paul is talking about here, because the value is no longer in just information, and maybe it has never been in just information, but rather it's, like Paul is saying, it's about the transformation, the emotion that we're able to give, and the overall experience that the reader is having, or the customer or consumer of the book, whether it's fiction or nonfiction or medium content books. So it's not about just getting out information, but it's about thinking, okay, what will the reader experience be? What will the consumer of this book, how will they experience this book? And I think that is something that you simply can't achieve by just prompting ChatGPT, write the text about this, because then you will get blog post information. And why would people pay for blog post information? They want something else when they're buying a book. Now, a book is great and valuable because it has all the information in one place. So that is value, and that you can't get from, for example, several blog posts. But you want to think beyond just information. So I'm happy you brought that up.
Yeah, I mean, there's actually one tool I'm using now, which is quite interesting. It's called Aphorai, and it's used mostly by academics. But the thing about Aphorai is that you can have your knowledge base of documents. So it's a bit like NotebookLM, but so you can have your specific knowledge base that you've put inside it, so you know it's good knowledge. You know, crap in, crap out, basically, quality in, quality out. If you draw on 100 quality sources for the research backdrop for whatever you're writing or putting together, you know that you're on firm ground, basically. And so what Aphorai have now built in is you can actually be writing, you can be writing a chapter, you can be writing a section, and then putting the references, to inform your argument or to get you thinking and in how you're putting the thing in, together with citations, the footnotes or the endnotes or whatever it might be. So if you're dealing with something that actually is quite tricky to pull off in terms of, is it accurate? Is it well grounded? Is it well based? But also retaining that human drive through, actually constructing the narrative, constructing the writing. I think things like that can be interesting as well, actually, because they can just keep you on that right balance between, human knowledge and wisdom and insight, and the AI kind of suggestions or summarizations or ideation or brainstorming, which of course it's fantastic at, and also your mind. And so at that point, you've got a triangulation of things going on. You've got you, like your brain and your writing skill, or whatever it is. You've got GPT or AI, which is helping to actually to ideate or to give ideas or angles or suggestions, or, on craft or connections. And then you have the knowledge base, which is the research knowledge base, which is basically informing the specific thing that you're actually doing, right? And for me, that's a nice, if you've got those three things working in balance, the chances are you're going to have a quality piece of work.
Great insights. You started answering this question a little bit. Do you want to expand on how AI tools help with the manuscript development?
I think it seems to me that it's there's obviously different levels of manuscript, right? And different, kind of something which is a beginner's guide to, let me see, to gardening is going to be different from, the Master Gardeners, 2025 or whatever, right? So, depending on the audience, the level at which you're trying to research and write and construct something, and are you looking for the absolute knockout book that's going to be there for 10 years? It's going to be in filmmaking, we used to talk about films of reference. If you made a film of reference on a topic, that was the film that was going to stand for decades. When people talked about something, that was the film they were going to point. Yeah, that was the ambition, always to make the film of reference. So clearly, if you're going to try to make the non-fiction book of reference on a topic, you're going to dig in. You're going to put a lot of effort into that, right? So the question then is, well, how to get there? And the one interesting tool I've come across recently allows you to basically, it does detailed research into a topic, right? But then it's starting to dial in the audience, and it's using copywriting methodology and copywriting psychology inside the outline that it's constructing. So it's based on an analysis of the niche and of the works inside that niche, and what people find interesting and what's lacking perhaps and so forth. So it's putting all of that in, but very interestingly, it's putting in it's starting to dial in what the audience for that book would want, right? And then the third piece of the pie is it's then constructing a kind of classic almost like sort of coaching program style system inside the outlines it's generating, right? Which I think is really interesting, because at that stage, what you're getting is a transformative system inside a very detailed, highly detailed outline. And you're getting it very glued to the audience and what those audience fears, desires, opportunities, and all that stuff would want with that particular book, right? But that certainly is a tool that I am paying a lot of attention to now and starting to use. Put together an initial outline, and when we say outline, we're talking about chapter, between 20 and 50 points per chapter in the book type outline, so highly detailed outline, and I'm then experimenting, taking those outlines across to Dibbly. And what Dibbly will then do is to actually go out and actually start researching and creating citations for every single part of that outline. So I'll probably try to fuse those two together, so that what one would end up with would be an extremely detailed, outline for a systematic, a book with a system, basically something that people can use to get a result. Yeah, that's certainly a huge, a big starting point, I think, to nail the outline. But then at a later stage, so one might use various AIs or whatever to actually write the first draft, and then, then use phone print analysis to actually then basically improve the draft, to make it more human and sound more like me, if you like, if I was writing the book. But then the trick then is, at the stage that you've got a first draft or maybe a second draft of the book, how do you then basically restructure it and get it to sing? How do you get the structure of the book to work well? And that's where in the kind of traditional publishing world, a developmental editor and line editors would start to come in, and you would pay these guys, thousands of dollars to basically give a series of recommendations about how to improve the book. But what I've been doing is trying to use one AI as a developmental editor. So I might use, say, Google Gemini as my developmental editor and Claude as my writer. So I take a Claude draft, a Claude chapter, for example, across to Gemini and say, hey, Gemini, you're the developmental editor. Tell me what's wrong with this, or tell me how to improve this. It will then give a series of developmental editing suggestions. I'll take those back to Claude and say, hey, Claude, the developmental editor says this. Oh, I'm sorry, I better improve. So basically starting to, and the more you work with AIs, you start to understand they have kind of almost like personalities. They have strengths and weaknesses, but it's you can start to feel the personalities in a sense inside each AI, and then start to think, well, actually, Claude is a bit dry and pretty humorless. Okay, Claude can be the editor. Gemini, Google Gemini can be the editor, and Claude tends to be a bit more, creative and a bit more, flowy. And okay, Claude can be the writer. And then literally just get them working together.
Yeah, that's amazing. Because I'm thinking of how I'm doing it with the books being created by writers. I'm always having a second person or third person look at the manuscript, because what the writer is creating, that she might not see, or he might not see, what the editor will see. So that's a genius strategy that you have going there.
Well, there's another another trick people can play is to make their own custom GPTs. And so what you can do is basically to train a GPT on the best principles of anything. So, for example, it could be, I've done one for cover design. So what I've done is to feed into a custom GPT. Okay, here are all the best principles of cover design from professional cover designers. Now what I want is a wizard where you're going to ask a series of questions, and we're going to dial in the prompt that we're going to use to actually create the cover.
That's amazing.
The results are stunning. Okay, and we can go into more detail perhaps later on, but you can use the same approach, for example, with developmental editing or with editing, right? You can say, okay, here are all the principles that a good developmental editor would use to analyze a piece of writing, or a chapter or two or whatever, and to feed back useful suggestions. Bam, 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 bam. Right. Now I want you to basically use that to analyze this work.
That's very interesting.
And so you've tuned in the AI to go very specifically into what you want it to do.
Okay, that wraps up the first part of our conversation with Paul, where we covered the foundations of book publishing, including finding the right niche, planning your book, and leveraging AI tools to make the process more efficient. For those insight-driven publishers elite, we're continuing to part 2, where Paul shares advanced strategies for creating unique book concepts, designing covers and interiors, and applying lessons from filmmaking to publishing at an exceptional level.